Okay, so today we're going to do something a little bit interesting. We're going to take a look at the Timex Metropolitan again, but this time we're going to compare it to the Orient Bambino. So that's what I've got right here on my wrist. We've got the Orient Bambino. And this Orient Bambino, I picked it up for about $120. I managed to get the Timex for around $35. So big price gap between the two. But I think the Bambino is widely recommended as like the best entry-level dress watch, one of the best values in dress watches that you can get, and I definitely agree with that. Timex is also heralded as a great value brand, and if you're looking for something inexpensive, Timex is a great place to go. So the question then comes, is it worth it saving up for the Orient Bambino, or is it just fine to get something like the Timex? What's going to be the difference there? And so hopefully this will be interesting. You guys can take a look, and if you're sort of caught in that quandary, do I want to spend less than $50 on a dress watch? Do I want to spend $120 on a dress watch? If you're kind of looking in that value area, maybe this will help you make that decision. So let's take a look and kind of compare those two watches. All right, so I can tell you right off the bat that today's comparison is not a fair comparison. We're going to be comparing two very different watches. On the one side, we have the Timex Metropolitan that we've been looking at over the last couple of videos, and today we're going to pair it up against the Orient Bambino. And again, I say it's not a fair comparison because the Orient Bambino is, I think, objectively a much better watch, and it shows. And if you look at the prices of the watches, the Timex, if you go to Timex's website and talk about retail prices, it retails for $75. Whereas the Bambino, if you go to Orient's website, they sell it for $300 is what they have it listed at. Now, both of these watches, you can find them for much cheaper on Amazon. I picked up my Metropolitan for about $35. I got my Bambino for, I think, $120. So either way you look at it, the Orient Bambino is roughly 3 times the cost of the Timex Metropolitan, maybe a little bit more than three times as much if you're looking at retail, but if you're looking at the Amazon prices, either way, roughly 3 times as expensive. So one of the questions that might come up would be, is the Orient Bambino 3 times as much watch as the Timex? And that's where I think we're going to try and balance out this comparison. So typically what we're doing when I go through these comparison videos is I'm going to just give 1 point for each category for the watch that I think is better, and we're going to basically, that allows you to pit 2 watches together and see, at least in my opinion, which one I think is the better watch. Well, obviously in this case, the Orient Bambino is the better watch in basically every category. What we're really concerned about, if we're going to do an actual comparison, is how much better it is. So in order to do that, we're going to be going through the categories, but this time I'm going to give Timex 1 point for every category. And the Orient Bambino, I'm going to give it between 0 and as many points as I think it might need to see how much better it is than the Timex. So if the Timex gets 1 point in, say, the style category, and we're going to look at the Bambino, is the Bambino twice as stylish as the Metropolitan? Is it 3 times as stylish? So that's what we're going to find out. And so what we'll be able to see at the end of this, we're going to be looking at 7 categories. So the Timex will get 7 points off the bat. Potentially the Bambino could get a 0 in one of these categories if I think that the Timex is actually better. In that case, the Bambino will score 0 points. But at the end of it, we'll total up the points and we'll see. The main criteria we'll look at is the Bambino 3 times better than the Timex? And if it is, then it completely wins out. If it's not, then I think that will show a pretty, another good showing for Timex. Again, it's not going to mean that Timex is a better watch, but it'll mean that it's probably potentially the better value. And we'll see how that goes. Obviously, this is very subjective, so this is all going on my opinions. So probably there'll be a lot of people that'll disagree with me, but yeah, we'll go through it and see. So the categories that we're going to look at, and we'll run through the categories fairly quickly for some of these, but they are style, case, band, usability, brand, movement, and quality. So we'll go through those 7 categories and we'll see just how much better the Bambino is than the the Metropolitan. And along those lines, kind of what we really want to look at is, what are you getting for that extra money? Is it going to be worth it to you to spend the extra money to get something like a Bambino, or would you just want the Timex and something that's really, really inexpensive that you can have a nice dress watch to wear? So let's see if we can answer those questions as we go, and we'll jump into it. Okay, so our first category that we're going to look at is style, and this is one that I think is actually kind of one of the closer categories. I think, again, as if you look back at the Timex Metropolitan reviews, I really like the style of the Metropolitan. I think it's a style that's very unique. It's one that you don't see very often, and I think they really nailed the formal dress watch look. That said, on this particular Bambino, I prefer the style of this one. I just love the design of it. It has kind of this very minimalist look to it. You've got a really cool domed crystal, which is kind of a very typical feature of the Bambino line. And just everything about it is kind of a nice vintage look that isn't, I think it's its own character that you don't see very often in a lot of other watches. And particularly I just really love the dial on the Bambino. It's got this really cool blue, and because the dial itself is also curved, you get some really cool reflections off of it. So I'm going to give obviously Timex is going to get 1 point. The Bambino, I'm going to give it 2 points for style. So I'm going to say that the Bambino is twice as stylish as the Timex Metropolitan. Next category we're going to look at is the case. Timex is getting 1 point for its what I believe is a plated brass case with a pressed down case back, whereas the Orient Bambino, I'm going to go ahead and give it 3 points because it has a full stainless steel case and has a screw down case back, which I think puts it a little bit above the Metropolitan, or significantly above the Metropolitan, even though they both still maintain a 30-meter water resistance. But that one will get out of the way pretty quick. So 1 point for the case to the Timex, 3 points to the Bambino. Next, let's talk about band. The bands on these two watches are very similar, almost interchangeable. They both went with a simple, plain black leather band. The Orient Bambino has a 21 millimeter, which is actually kind of a bummer. I would prefer that if they went with either a 20 or a 22, because those bands are much easier to find. But they went with the 21. That said, the quality of the band on the Bambino is a little bit better than the band on the Timex. It's a little bit thicker leather, feels a little bit more durable, like it'll last longer. So we're going to give the Bambino 2 points for its simple band. It's nothing spectacular, but it is better than the Timex's genuine leather band. Okay, let's talk usability, and this is another tough one. So the Timex, what it does have going for it is that it has a quartz movement, which I think from a usability standpoint is a plus, actually, right? You don't have to wind it, you don't have to worry about it losing time when you take it off. It's always going to have the right time as long as the battery's going. That said, the Bambino has a couple of benefits to it. It does have a second hand, which the Metropolitan doesn't, so that adds a little bit of usability to it. You can track seconds, which is something you can't do on the Timex. It also has a date window, which the Metropolitan does not. And again, those are design elements that I think the Metropolitan took intentionally, but leaving those out, it does hit the usability a little bit. Also, I think the Bambino is a little bit more of a versatile watch. You can swap out different straps and maybe wear it in more casual situations. And the Metropolitan, I think, has a more formal look that's a little bit harder to use in multiple situations. So I'm going to give the Bambino 2 points for usability in this category versus the Timex's standard 1 point. All right, let's talk brand, and this is a tough one because Timex, they're very well respected by people in the watch community. Everybody, not everybody, but many watch enthusiasts really love Timex. But that said, they also love Orient, and it's kind of tough because I think Timex is the more well-recognized brand, but not necessarily in a good way. If you talk to someone who doesn't know a lot about watches, their impression of Timex is going to be that it's a cheap, inexpensive brand. But at the same time, many of them those same people will not have even heard of Orient. But maybe because of that, they might assume that Orient's like a more expensive brand than Timex, which would be correct. That said, and I think even among watch enthusiasts, Orient is a more respected brand. And personally, I much prefer the Orient brand over the Timex brand. because I'm still new to all this. And to me, again, it's hard for me to shake that mentality that I've had of Timex as being a cheaper brand, even though I've really come to appreciate them much more. For me, the novelty of having a Japanese brand like Orient, which is something that to me is still very novel and new, I really I'm kind of drawn to that. So I'm going to give Orient 3 points for their brand versus Timex's 1 point. Okay, so let's talk the movement of the two watches. Timex has what they have labeled as a Japanese movement in there, and it's kind of a unique one because it's a quartz movement that doesn't have a second hand, and it appears to measure the time a little bit different because of that. It actually has what appears to be kind of a ticking minute hand, which every 20 seconds or so you get a little tick of it that's very noticeable, which is interesting but not terribly spectacular. The Orient Bambino, you have a automatic movement, so a mechanical movement. Not only is it an automatic movement, it's an in-house movement, so Orient makes the movement themselves. And this one on the Generation 2 Bambino, it also has hacking and hand winding, so it's actually a very, very nice movement. And it's something that, generally mechanical movements are more expensive than quartz movements, and they're usually to be preferred by watch collectors. And they have a nice kind of novelty to it. So that said, I'm gonna give the Orient Bambino 4 points for its movement versus the Timex's 1 point for its movement. So last category, let's talk about the quality of the two watches. Now I think we've gone over the quality of the Metropolitan fairly well. I think it's a great level of quality for the price. It's an excellent value. That said, one of the things that I noticed in the review is that they did seem to cut some corners on the quality in order to get the price down that low. You have a very interesting dial on the Metropolitan. It has a nice texture to it that kind of gives the illusion of depth without really spending the cost of adding that depth. You compare that to the Bambino. The Bambino actually has a domed crystal and a domed dial. So the dial itself is not a flat dial. The dial is curved as well, and along with that, the hands are even curved a little bit. So it's very interesting to look at because they went the extra mile to actually put in a curved shaped dial with some added depth to it. Also, the finish on the dial has a very interesting kind of sundial blue or blue sunburst that I really like, which seems a little bit more expensive than Timex's textured dial. The markers on the Bambino and the logo on the Bambino are kind of applied on there for the 12, 3, and 9 hour markers, and that looks really nice. You got these little metal batons there that you can tell they're raised, they're metal, they stand out from the dial. So very interesting there. The Bambino, it has a high domed mineral crystal. So all the areas where Timex kind of took shortcuts, the Bambino I think didn't. I think they kind of they did everything that they wanted to do with that watch and still put it out at a great price. The other thing is the case. Obviously, the case of the Bambino, they went with a full stainless steel case, whereas Timex, they kind of cut the corners a little bit to give it probably what's most likely a plated brass case. So this is another big one where I think the quality on the Bambino is clearly much higher than that on the Timex. And so I'm going to give the quality of the Bambino 4 points to Timex's 1. Okay, so let's tally up these points and see which one came out on top, or actually let's see how far on top the Bambino came. So obviously on all these categories, Timex is getting 1 point, so they're going to wind up with a total of 7 points. The question is, did the Bambino get up to 21 points? So for style, the Bambino scored 2 points. For the case, it scored 3 points. For its band, 2 points. Usability, 2 points. Brand, 3 points. Movement, 4 points. Quality, 4 points, for a grand total of 20 points. So just shy of 21 points. So take that for what it's worth. In that case, I would say that the Timex comes out on top then in the value category, especially at the price you can buy it on Amazon. $35 is not a lot of money, and it's something that you can easily pick up. But if you want to stretch for an Orient Bambino, it's something that, for most of us, I think we'd have to think a little bit before we dropped, $120 on a watch. A lot of us that are in this kind of budget watch collecting categories, whereas the Timex could be more of like an impulse buy, and I think it would be a very worthwhile one to pick up. There's very little reason not to. So I think the Timex Metropolitan, I think it still holds up as an excellent watch, but it's not in the same category as the Bambino. I would say not even close. I would say the Bambino is easily twice as good of a watch, probably significantly above that, and the Bambino is also just an amazing value for the money. They're both great values for the money, but again, the prices are very different. So if you want a great watch for $35, go with your Timex Metropolitan. If you want a great watch for $130, go with the Orient Bambino. So look at your budget. But hopefully this has kind of helped you if you're considering, a dress watch and trying to figure out how much you want to spend on it. Hopefully this will give you something of an idea of what the differences are between these kind of levels of dress watches, and hope you found this interesting. With all that said, thank you guys for watching. As always, appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. Helps me out, and I'll continue putting these videos out, and hopefully we'll see you next time.